therapist Kristen Jacobson.
Hey everyone, I'm Kristen, the anxiety therapist, and today I want to talk about the concept of narcissism. I feel like narcissistic abuse has sort of been a trending topic as of late, and when it comes to narcissism, we're not just sort of discussing this personality trait, but really a more profound psychological condition that sort of intersects diagnostic criteria with real world implications. So narcissism has long been known as both a clinical personality disorder and a behavioral pattern that really significantly impacts interpersonal relationships and individual well-being. So today I want to kind of peel back the layers of narcissism, ranging from its more overt forms to more of the subtle manifestations of what we call covert narcissism. So at its core, narcissism is marked by this exaggerated sense of self-importance and a deep need for excessive attention and admiration, as well as a lack of empathy for others. So they have this sort of grandiose exterior, but oftentimes inside they have very fragile self-esteem and they are susceptible to even like the slightest criticism. I like to think about narcissism as sort of being on a spectrum. So this can range from healthy self-confidence to really pathological self-absorption, which can ultimately disrupt daily functioning and destroy relationships. When we have this continuum, there are varying degrees of intensity and dysfunctionality. So at the healthier end, people might simply exhibit self-confidence and ambition, but then as we move more toward that pathological end, these traits can really escalate into arrogance, entitlement, and really manipulative behaviors that can have a tremendous impact on relationships and interactions with others. And narcissism is not uncommon among high achievers, particularly those in the corporate world, where we see like CEOs and other high-level executives often exhibit some narcissistic traits. And this can be attributed partially to the environment of things being very high stakes, competitive, kind of this being in the limelight and having this constant visibility that demands and rewards that inflated sense of self. And so in some circumstances, these narcissistic traits can actually contribute to the person's success by fostering this sort of bold, assertive, and uncompromising leadership style. But if that is left unchecked, the same traits can really lead to dysfunctional leadership, toxic work environments, and ultimately organizational failure. So this paradox of narcissistic leadership in high performance roles highlights the need for this balanced approach that really sort of leverages the strengths of those narcissistic traits, but mitigates the potential for damage. So narcissism can manifest in various forms. For starters, we have overt narcissism. So these are going to be the people that pop into your mind when you think of somebody who is narcissistic, right? They're the embodiment of what most people would imagine when they think of that term. So they're going to be outwardly grandiose, always seeking to be the center of attention, very boastful, and exude this sort of unwavering confidence. And they have this distinct need for admiration and, like I mentioned earlier, sort of this disregard for the feelings of others. Then we have covert narcissism. So this is something that I think people are less familiar with. It can also be called vulnerable narcissism. So covert narcissism is a lot less obvious and more insidious. And so covert narcissists, they might appear shy or self-effacing and experience the same insecurities as overt narcissists, but they internalize that entitlement and self-importance instead of sort of displaying it. So they really excel in manipulation under the guise of vulnerability and hyper-focus on this need for attention. And so this makes their tactics particularly dangerous because they're so difficult to detect until that significant damage is done. I want to talk about a form of gaslighting called Darvo. So the Darvo method stands out as being particularly destructive, and it involves sort of 3 steps. So the first is deny. That's the D. So the narcissist will deny any wrongdoing, refusing to acknowledge their actions. Number 2 is attack. That's the A. The accuser is then targeted and is often blamed for provoking the behavior of the narcissist, or even accused of the same or worse faults. And then number 3 is reverse victim and offender. So that's the RVO. So the narcissist portrays themselves as the victim and blame shifts and sort of garners sympathy, discrediting the true victim and confusing outside observers. So, as I mentioned, this is a classic example of gaslighting, and it really distorts other people's reality in order to favor the narcissist and undermines the victim's credibility and mental stability. So, I also don't want to completely pathologize narcissism, because many narcissists have experienced significant trauma in their past, and this can be a really pivotal factor in the development of narcissistic traits. So if someone has experienced childhood abuse, neglect, or excessively high expectations from caregivers, these can lead individuals to sort of construct this facade of being invulnerable and this superiority, both of which are essentially defense mechanisms. And so this protective exterior really helps shield their fragile self-esteem from further harm, but it does so at the cost of healthy emotional connections. So understanding the link between trauma and narcissism is really crucial, because it highlights the deep-seated vulnerability that really lies beneath those more overt displays of grandiosity and self-centered behavior. So many people, especially people who come to therapy, are going to be the victims in narcissistic relationships versus the narcissistic person themselves. Sometimes narcissists will have enough self-awareness primarily with the feedback from other people that they have these narcissistic traits, and some of them will make their way into therapy. That is rare for somebody who would be sort of at the far end of the spectrum. Most people who would have narcissistic personality disorder are not going to seek out treatment, because in their mind, there's nothing wrong, right? Their sense of self is very inflated. But narcissism has really profound psychological and emotional implications for those who interact closely with them. So this could be having a narcissistic parent or sibling or partner, and this pervasive lack of empathy and these manipulative behaviors can really lead to significant distress for those people who are around the narcissist, be it their partners, family members, colleagues, whomever. So the victims often find themselves experiencing a lot of confusion and self-doubt and a really diminished sense of self-worth, because they're constantly subject to this gaslighting and emotional manipulation, essentially emotional abuse. And so over time, this can result in anxiety, depression, and even sometimes symptoms of post-traumatic stress, as these individuals really struggle to kind of reconcile this disparity between the narcissist's public persona, what other people see, but then the private behaviors that person is experiencing behind closed doors. And so this constant demand for attention and the emotional roller coaster can really create a taxing environment, leading to really significant stress and emotional exhaustion. So one strategy that can be used for coping with narcissism is called the gray rock method. And this is sort of a detachment technique, because you want to protect your emotional and mental health. So the gray rock technique involves making yourself kind of as uninteresting and non-reactive or non-responsive as possible, essentially being akin to a gray rock. So the goal of this method is to make the narcissist lose interest in you by really offering no emotional feedback or engagement that they could then exploit. So here's how you can apply it effectively. Number one is having monotone responses. So keep your communication brief and emotionally neutral. Avoid sharing personal thoughts or feelings that they could sort of use as ammunition for manipulation. You want to limit the information that you're sharing. So be cautious about the amount of personal information you disclose, because more information can lead to more opportunities for manipulation. You want the interactions to be predictable and boring. So make them dull, make them predictable. It reduces the narcissist's interest and the likelihood of them engaging you in some of their mind games. And then you want to have a non-reactive demeanor. This might be the hardest thing, just to maintain a calm and non-reactive demeanor, even as they're provoking you, because emotional reactions often fuel the narcissist's engagement. So this method can be particularly beneficial in situations in which cutting off all contact is not possible, which is often the case, or in maybe a co-parenting situation, or when the narcissist is a coworker, right? You can't get away from them, so you have to figure out ways to interact with them that's kind of do the least amount of damage mentally and emotionally. Another essential strategy for dealing with narcissists is setting clear and firm boundaries. This also serves as a protective mechanism, but it also communicates to the narcissist what behaviors are unacceptable. So this can sort of help contain the narcissist's attempts to manipulate and control. So I hope this video was informative and that it provided some insights and techniques in how you can better understand and deal with anyone in your life who may have narcissistic traits. And feel free to, leave a comment with your own experiences or ask a question if you need clarification on anything. All right, have a good week. I'll see you next time.